And normally right now we have our good, bad, and very, very ugly brought to you by the organic wine company, ecowine.com. But today, I guess it's going to be Lamar Waldron brought to you by ecowine.com. Watergate, The Hidden History, Nixon, the Mafia, and the CIA is Lamar's new book. Lamar and I collaborated on two books about the Kennedy assassination. Today is the anniversary of the death of Bobby Kennedy, sad milestone, Lamar.
That's correct. He died on June the 6th after being shot early on the morning of June the 5th, just after winning that California primary where he would have faced, and which probably meant he would have faced Richard Nixon in the election.
Wow. The assassination of Kennedy, and as you were going through in the last half hour, you were going through this long list of people who were associated with the Watergate burglary. And so many of those names were the same names that we ran across, and I think at least one of them that I might have interviewed or that we were digging up. In any case, the names that we ran across when we were putting together the legacy of secrecy and ultimate sacrifice, the books about the Kennedy assassination, which, by the way, is being made into a movie by Warner Brothers starring Leonardo DiCaprio, and that's ongoing, right?
That's still in development. They're working on the screenplay, and Robert De Niro has expressed his interest in playing Carlos Marcello, so we're just all
should be
hopeful.
Fascinating.
And Leo and his father George are just super to deal with.
Yeah, so what is the connection between Richard Nixon and the Kennedy assassination? There have been, this is something that really wasn't so much addressed in the book, and there are these people who are kind of chattering about it, but it seems to me that this is all peripheral, that it's shared circles. But tell me.
Nixon didn't have a connection, but some of the Watergate burglars did. That's the interesting thing. A lot of people are distracted by erroneous information on the internet that says that Nixon was at a party with J. Edgar Hoover in Dallas the night before the assassination and a big Texas oil millionaire plotting Kennedy's murder. But no, that didn't happen. Nixon was out partying with Joan Crawford, the wife of the head of the Pepsi Cola company. Nixon was in Dallas for a Pepsi convention. It was well documented. He was in the papers slamming JFK. And Nixon flew out the morning of the assassination, Dallas being the last place he would have been. And of course, as people can learn, and I have this in briefer form in the Watergate book, they were going to kill Nixon in Tampa 4 days before Dallas, and in Chicago 3 weeks before Dallas. So Nixon didn't have anything to do with JFK's murder. However, the Kennedy's brothers, JFK and Bobby, they were trying to keep Cuba from being an issue in the '64 campaign, because a lot of people thought that Nixon would be facing Kennedy again. And in fact, Nixon was grooming himself, saying I'm not interested, but actually being very interested in running in '64.
Right, because the election of '60 was a squeaker.
Right, it was a squeaker, one of the closest in history. And so they wanted to take that off the table. They were trying to find a peaceful solution to the problem of Castro with two different back-channel negotiated peaceful settlements. The Kennedys wasn't working, wasn't developing, so they had set themselves a deadline by the end of the year before the '64 campaign set off, and they were working with the head of the Cuban army, Commander Juan Almeida, to stage a palace coup against Fidel on December 1st, 1963, 10 days after Dallas. Now, several of the Watergate burglars and their overseer, E. Howard Hunt, were working on that operation. E. Howard Hunt was working on that operation for the CIA, the coup plan. James McCord allegedly was one of the Watergate burglars.
Now, this is an operation that Jack didn't have operational knowledge of. Bobby was basically running this.
Jack had operational approval of it, but he left the details of it to Bobby.
Right.
In other words, Bobby was running it very tight. Most people in government, even Secretary of State Dean Rusk, didn't know about it. Even Rusk only learned right after JFK's death. It was that secret.
Right.
And so Bernard Barker was E. Howard Hunt's assistant for that operation, as he had been for the Bay of Pigs, where E. Howard Hunt was a big figure. And that, by the way, explains the Bay of Pigs thing, which is on the smoking gun tape, who's released forced Nixon's resignation.
Or Richard Nixon said, yeah.
Right. So Bernard Barker was a longtime mafia guy for Santo Trafficante. And so he basically sold out the coup plan to Trafficante. Trafficante, Carlos Marcello, and Johnny Roselli all later made credible confessions to having killed JFK. So flash ahead to Watergate. E. Howard Hunt's the overseer, but two of the burglars, Bernard Barker and Frank Fiorini, by then using the name of Frank Sturgis, which sounded a lot less mafia. Sturgis, Fiorini, and Barker were still working for Santo Trafficante because Trafficante had worked on the CIA Mafia plots. He had donated to that 1960 Mafia Hoffa Nixon bribe. And get this, Nixon was just so consumed with money and winning. In December of 1971, there was a second $1 million bribe from the Mafia involving Santo Trafficante and Carlos Marcello for Nixon to release Hoffa from prison, but with the condition that he couldn't rejoin the Teamsters Union. Because many Mafia figures, like Tony Provenzano, they prefer dealing with Frank Fitzsimmons, Hoffa's replacement, who was an amiable, easygoing guy, not hard-charging like Hoffa.
Right.
And so you've got two Mafia Hoffa Nixon bribes, 60 and December 71, two plots to kill Fidel, September 60 and December 71, and that's why Nixon could not let this information in that one secret Cuban dossier compiled by Fidel Castro after the failure of the attempt to kill him in Chile in December 71. And apparently Castro...
So this is, and 71 was the third year of the Nixon presidency.
That's exactly right. He was getting ready to run for the presidency again. And so Castro had this dossier of CIA attempts to kill him compiled that began in 60 under Nixon, ended in 71 under Nixon. And the CIA only had a little piece of it. They didn't know what it said. Did it have details about the Mafia? Did it have details about the Mafia Hoffa Nixon bribe? They didn't know. They only had a piece of it. So first, the Watergate crew, with all these current informers agents, tries to burglarize on May the 13th, the Chilean embassy right here in Washington.
Because there was an attempt to assassinate Castro in Chile.
Right. So Fidel got...
And it was a Mafia CIA operation that was pushed by Nixon.
Right. The December 71 one didn't have very strong Mafia connections.
Okay.
But it definitely was a CIA attempt. The 60 one was totally Mafia. And the exposure of any of these could have, of course, led to the exposure of the others and the Mafia Hoffa Nixon bribes. Which would have
devastated Richard Nixon's political career.
Well, and could have sent him to prison, too.
Yeah.
And because people knew Hoffa had gotten out with these unusual special conditions.
But nobody knew he'd bribed the president of the United States.
Exactly. Not at that time. The FBI and Time magazine would eventually document that. So they first look for this Cuban dossier at the Chilean embassy. They either don't find it or they find a piece of it. They then start on May the 26th, the first of the 4 attempts to burglarize the Watergate offices of the Democratic National Committee. I mean, there was some bugging, but that was not the main reason, and several of the Watergate burglars have said that. You could send 2 or 3 men in to bug a telephone, but when you're trying to photograph 1,400 pages of documents, you need a 5-man crew, all the film they were captured with. And of course, some of the people on the Watergate crew, like Barker, who was an active participant in JFK's murder, he wanted to know what those files said for himself as well.
Wow.
Now, but Commander,
covering his own tracks.
Exactly. And yet there was a national security excuse that Nixon talked about till the day before he resigned, that all this was national security and it shouldn't matter and he shouldn't have to resign.
Because it had to do with killing Castro.
Not just killing Castro, Commander Almeida was still alive and unexposed at that time.
Well, this is what you and I encountered when we were writing the book. And
we didn't want to expose him.
Harry Williams gave us the name of Almeida, and I came here to D.C. and talked with a high government official who immediately told me I could go to prison for saying that name because that guy was still alive and it was an ongoing, active CIA operation.
He or his family could have been killed. I mean, this is the number 3 guy in Cuba, the head of the Cuban army, so no one wanted to expose that. Nixon...
Almeida has since died, by the way, so we can talk about him and we can use his name.
And that's why Nixon used Hunt and Barker and these guys, because these guys had worked, some of these guys had worked on the JFK Almeida coup plan. So there was a legitimate thing. Nixon talked about the Chilean embassy burglary on a tape, not released till 1999, and he said it was a CIA cover. So Nixon was using these guys because to himself, he was saying, look, if these guys ever get caught or there's blowback, the CIA will have to cover it up to protect, Commander Almeida in Cuba. And it did happen for a while. The CIA initially did force the FBI to back off for a period of several weeks, but then, the pressure was just too much. Mm-hmm. But people forget many things about Watergate. Nixon sailed to an easy victory. Watergate was not a big story in 1972. After the first week, It was not a factor in the
It was
election.
sort of like
It was
Scott
rarely
Walker's pending indictment, possibly. It's like, we'll have an election.
I was shocked when I had been busy on this 800-page book and was bringing myself up to date on the Walker situation the last few days. And I was like, what? Corruption investigation? In all the mainstream media news I've heard, I kind of haven't heard there's a big corruption investigation.
Right.
And the same thing with Watergate. I mean, the reason, and this is a very much of a factor for today, Nixon was actually beloved by the mainstream media, not just the conservative media. He was endorsed 10-1 over McGovern. And, and the margin of votes was not 10-1, needless to say. Nixon had learned how to manipulate the press from his first race to his last. And the press was very supportive of Nixon until finally some of these guys, James McCord being the biggest one, and if you recall, Bobby's top Cuban exile aide, Harry Williams, he had very good things to say about McCord. And McCord is responsible in many ways for exposing Nixon and Watergate. It was his letter to Judge Sirica that blew the case open and finally put it back on the front pages and forced Nixon's resignation.
Let's dig into that a little deeper in a few minutes here with Lamar Waldron. His new book, Watergate, The Hidden History, Nixon, the Mafia, and the CIA. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Lamar Waldron is the author of the new book, Watergate, The Hidden History, Nixon, the Mafia, and the CIA. Also check out Lamar's other books like Ultimate Sacrifice and Legacy of Secrecy. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Lamar Waldron in the studio with me, and we are talking about his new book, Watergate, The Hidden History, Nixon, the Mafia, and the CIA. I want to come back to the McCord thing when we come back from the break, from the next break, if that's okay with you, because our commercial radio listeners I'm sure would like to hear the rest of that. So during this break, I'm just curious, it's a kind of a slug line, I guess, on the bottom of the book says, a groundbreaking investigation of what Nixon was really after and why he risked the presidency to get it. It was, you want to just re-summarize that for people who are just joining us?
Sure. He wanted to get what we call the Cuban dossier, what the CIA likes to call the Black Book, which was a big volume prepared by Fidel Castro of CIA attempts to kill Fidel Castro.
So Nixon was trying to get, the Watergate burglary was all about Nixon trying to get a document that Fidel Castro put together? And gave to the Democrats?
Well, no, he gave it, it's never clear that he did give it to the Democrats. Nixon was so paranoid, he worried if it fell into Democratic hands, that would be bad.
Uh-huh.
And the head of the Democratic Party, Larry O'Brien, whom the NBA's championship trophy is named after today because he later became NBA commissioner, had worked for Howard Hughes. And Howard Hughes's man, private investigator Robert Mayhew, had worked on those CIA mafia plots that Nixon had spawned in 1960 to kill Fidel with the mafia.
What was Mayhew's role in those?
Mayhew was the go-between. Mayhew had done jobs for Nixon before. Mayhew was the cutout. He was a private detective for Hughes. He had done a couple jobs for Nixon before. So in 1960, the CIA officially went through Mayhew to deal with Johnny Roselli and Santo Traficante and those guys. So the CIA wound up dealing with them directly, too. Mm-hmm. So they worried that Robert Mayhew, who by 72 had fallen out with Howard Hughes, Larry O'Brien had briefly worked for Howard Hughes, that Mayhew had told O'Brien something about those plots, number one, but that if the Democrats, McGovern, O'Brien, anybody got that Cuban dossier, and Cuba and Chile were very close at the time because Chile had that socialist president, Salvador Allende. And so they worried that if somebody had that dossier, they needed to know what it said. Did it spell out everything in all the detail? Nixon's longtime dealing with the mafia, the Hoffa bribes. What did it say? They didn't know. They only had a tiny piece of a 90-plus page document. And that's what they had to go into the Chilean embassy for. That's what they had to go into the Watergate attempt 4 times to do that.
Right. And so Nixon was looking for the documentation that would not only show something that he could arguably say was a good thing, that he was trying to kill Castro.
Depending on how it was written down.
Right. But also that he was involved with the mafia and with these bribes, and that he had taken $1 million in bribes.
Twice, including once just 5 months or so before the first Watergate break-in. So this was an ancient history. That last Mafia Hoffa Nixon bribe, December 71. Wow. So that's what it was about. And people should know, in the book, we print the Cuban dossier that Nixon was so desperate to get in its entirety. Is in the book.
Really?
You can have in that book what Nixon gave up his presidency to get. And the final analysis, when it was finally made public, more than a year after Nixon resigned, in some ways it was not as bad as Nixon had feared. In some ways it was as bad as Nixon had feared.
Right. Remarkable. Well, if it could have sent him to prison, it was pretty bad. Lamar Waldron is with us. The book, Watergate, The Hidden History. We'll be right back with more of it. Oh, we've got a full screen of it.
Disorder, from the sirens night and day, from the fires of the homeless, from the ashes of the gay. Democracy is coming to the USA.
Helping you win the water cooler wars, and today helping you know everything about Watergate. You thought that it was Woodward and Bernstein who blew it up? It wasn't. James McCord, Lamar Waldron. Lamar Waldron is the author of the new book, Watergate, The Hidden History, Nixon, the Mafia, and the CIA. It just came out this week. Today, or next week, will be the 40th anniversary of the Watergate break-in. Today, the anniversary of the death of Bobby Kennedy, who was not directly involved with this, but had his own involvement with some of the same people for more noble goals, actually.
That's right. And in fact, McCord is one of 4 people who were working on operations for Bobby Kennedy and John F. Kennedy in 1963, and for Bobby early in 64, who played key roles in exposing Nixon. In other words, it wasn't just Woodward and Bernstein, because you'll look in Woodward and Bernstein, you won't see anything about the Mafia, you'll see very little about the CIA. You know, they did a great job. All the President's Men is a great read, but that was a small part of the story. People don't realize that book, they had finished that book in January of 1974, 8 months before Nixon resigned. The book was out in bookstores months before Nixon resigned. So, you know, it doesn't tell the whole story. But James McCord, who was working, allegedly, I should say, because he's still alive, on part of one of Bobby Kennedy's most secret plans to bring democracy to Cuba in 1963, McCord was a retired high CIA official.
So he is not a Mafia guy.
He's not a Mafia guy. When one of Bobby's aides talked to us about McCord, he was different from Barker and Hunt. I mean, he was, he's a conservative Christian, but he seems to really believe stuff and not just do it for show. So, he wrote a letter to Judge John Sirica. All the Watergate burglars had pretty much pleaded guilty. McCord had been convicted.
Sirica, once again, was the guy the judge who was overlooking the
Watergate
prosecution for the Watergate burglars.
And basically, the Watergate burglars, most of them, pleaded, except for Lydia McCord, pleaded guilty, said no higher-ups were involved. It was just us on our own. Yeah, it was a nice day.
They took a fall for the employer.
And McCord wrote this letter after Nixon had finally fired his CIA director, Richard Helms, who figures into the book very largely. McCord wrote this letter to Sirica saying, hey, it goes way higher. People are lying about this. Then the story finally was on the front pages again after months and months.
This is long after
Woodward
and Bernstein's book. Woodward and Bernstein's book is out.
No, not actually. This is March of 1973. Woodward and Bernstein are still writing their book. But the story is dead and has been dead for months, and Richard Nixon's gotten reelected in the landslide. So the story would have died if not for McCord's letter. The next guy that comes up, and the thing is, though, is Woodward and Bernstein would have never possibly reported the story if not for a guy by the name of Joseph Califano. Joseph Califano.
Later headed up HEW.
Right, under Jimmy Carter. Joseph Califano in 1963 was the assistant to Cyrus Vance, Secretary of the Army, and Joseph Califano and Cyrus Vance played big roles in JFK and Bobby's secret Cuba plans.
Right.
Joseph Califano was the counsel for the Democratic National Committee at the Watergate and for the Washington Post.
Oh,
the morning of the arrest, he gets called, of course, because he represents the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, and then it's Joseph Califano that calls the Washington Post and says, "Hey, you guys should cover this story," and boy, this could go all the way to the White House. And then on the morning of the 18-minute gap, which the book does explain for the first time, Joseph Califano files a lawsuit for the DNC against the Republicans, which also helped to keep the case alive and get more evidence.
Wow.
Let's flash ahead to the spring of 1973. John Ehrlichman and H.R. Haldeman, Nixon's top two aides, have had to resign because of the fallout from McCord's letter. The new chief of staff for Richard Nixon is Alexander Haig. Now, Haig had been working in the White House as an assistant national security advisor under Henry Kissinger after getting the job thanks to a recommendation from Joseph Califano. Haig calls Joseph Califano, says, "Hey, Nixon wants me to be his chief of staff. Should I do it?" And Califano says, yeah, you should. And so Alexander Haig had worked with Joseph Califano and JFK and Bobby in 63 on that
Cuban
secret
contingency plan, yeah.
Right. Then we flash ahead to the tapes. The revelation of the tapes by Alexander Butterfield. That didn't just put the Watergate hearings on the front page. That made it must-see TV.
Right, because it's now a media event.
Right.
There's audio.
Alexander Butterfield. Guess who he worked with in late 1963, early 64? He worked with Alexander Haig and Joseph Califano on the wind down of the secret coup plan that JFK and Bobby had for 63. So you had these three guys that worked together in 63, Haig, Califano, and Butterfield. And of course, Haig is the guy who later talked Nixon into resigning.
Right.
He is the one. Nixon wanted to fight it in a trial because he knew the national security excuse could technically get him off.
Right.
But Haig maneuvered him out. So those three guys who worked together in 63 under the Kennedys played key roles, and they were working on a different side of the operation in 63 than James McCord.
Amazing. In 20 seconds, can you explain the gap in the tape?
The gap in the tape is when the New York Times identified E. Howard Hunt as having played a key role in the Bay of Pigs, and the lawsuit was filed. So Nixon worried everything was going to come out about his CIA Mafia plots. By the time of the smoking gun tape, he wasn't having to say CIA Mafia plots. He was referring to it as the Bay of Pigs thing. But apparently on the day of the 18-minute gap, even though Nixon left tons of other crimes unerased, he knew the CIA Mafia plots, those Nixon Mafia Hoffa bribes, that was too much. That had to be erased.
So he erased it. So he got Rosemary Woods to do it, or whatever.
No, he did it. Rosemary Woods was...
Richard Nixon did it himself?
All the evidence points to Richard Nixon doing it himself. There's not one erasure. There's several. There are more erasures that same day and missing recordings from that same day. So it's not even just one 18-minute gap from one day.
Amazing. Lamar Waldron. The book is Watergate, The Hidden History, Nixon, the Mafia, and the CIA. It's in bookstores now this week. Lamar, thanks for being with us.